Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to be here. It's great to have the opportunity to be able to come together and worship God. I'm always thankful every time we have this opportunity, and I always like to express how we should be so thankful to be in a blessed place like we are so we can worship God and not have to worry about some of the things they do elsewhere, some of the dangers. We've been doing a study on Sunday mornings about this whole month on different things about aspect of man's brokenness. This series has been a haunted series, and it's kind of had the theme of this time of the year when many people have their minds inclined towards the Halloween season and evil and things such as that. Not to support it in any way of promoting that it's a good thing, but more or less just to take an eye again, some looks at thoughts that can be on our minds around this time of the year. Man's broken. Not that God made something himself that is imperfect, because God created man, He created a whole world, and at the end of all His creation, He looked back on it and said, it's all very good. But man's broken because he has a choice that he has the ability to make. He can choose to either follow God or not follow God. And man, when he gets to the point where he makes that choice in his life, we always choose to not follow God. There's only ever been one person who's ever born in the flesh and got to that point and chose to follow God, and that was Jesus himself, God in the flesh. Man's broken. Because when we make that choice, it separates us from God. All the way back in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve decide to step away from God, the different relationships were ruined. The relationship they had with God, the relationship they had with each other, the relationship they had with themselves, and even with their environment. The world was even cursed to some extent with thorns and thistles and the pains of childbirth. It was tainted by the decisions man made. Man is broken. We're very broken. As individuals, we have to come to terms and deal with our brokenness and try to live our lives in such a way to restore what was broken. And so that's been the study we've been looking at on Sunday mornings. This morning, we're looking at how we're haunted by fear. Now, you may be thinking right away, well, I'm not haunted by fear. I'm not scared. That was something that I was taught at an early age, that especially men, we're not supposed to be scared of anything. Just to let you in on a little secret, I'm terrified of a lot of things. It is not hard to scare me. In fact, just last night, we were watching a movie over at Marty's house, and one he had rented, and it was not supposed to be that scary. But every time something popped out, I was the one jumping 3 feet in the air. Marty and Patty were pretty well calm and enjoying the movie, but I get terrified, frightened, and scared. That's not a bad thing. It's built into us. But I'm not necessarily just talking about when someone jumps out and says, boo, and you jump in the air. This isn't so much just being scared by shock or by something that we deem scary, whether it be some beast or some evil individual. More of fear itself and the root of it. You see, all of fear stems from a basic principle. But we'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. I might have mentioned our text for this morning's lesson, Romans chapter 8, verse 15. I don't know if you can see that up there. Romans chapter 8, verse 15. If you'd like to go ahead and be turning over there, that's going to be our text for this morning's lesson. And while you are turning over there, I have some thoughts to help get our minds in the right place for this morning's lesson. Beginning with the question, have you ever felt deeply afraid? Do you ever felt afraid? Possibly you have. Maybe there's been something that has happened to you or something that's happened to someone else that scares you. That's not a bad thing. I can remember when I was little, we used to love to be afraid. I used to love to watch this television show. You can't see it very well from this, but if you're a 90s age area kid, then you're probably familiar with the TV show, Are You Afraid of the Dark? It would come on and they would tell these scary stories around a campfire, and I really enjoyed getting to watch them, and it was something that I liked to do. I liked to be afraid. I don't really know why, but I did. And somehow by watching these different TV shows and hearing these scary stories, I guess it helped in a way. It helped us cope with the different fears we had in life. That's not really getting any brighter, no matter how hard I try. It helped us cope with different fears in life, and it helped us deal with them. And more than that, it was just entertaining. I found myself having one of several reactions whenever I get scared. And perhaps you found the same thing. Sometimes when I'm scared, I just want to hide. Maybe I want to curl up into a ball and act like nothing's there. One that I'm sure we're all familiar with, you get scared at night, you just pull the covers up over your head. Somehow those covers at night are going to protect you. I don't know what kind of protection those thin sheets of cloth can provide, but somehow that makes us feel more safe. What's your response to fear? Maybe it's to run. That's always a pretty good response, especially in scary movies or something. When someone's being chased, what do? You run. I always wonder about when someone hears a noise in a dark house or something, they go and investigate. That wouldn't be my response. Maybe you run from fear. Maybe you just cry. It's not a bad thing. Maybe your response is to pray. That's an interesting thought. No matter if you believe in God or not, believe in any kind of higher being, people will look for something when they get really scared. That's not really a bad idea, is it? In fact, that's going to be somewhat the topic of this morning's lesson. What do you do when you feel afraid? What should the response to that be? If you're there in the book of Romans, chapter 8 and verse 15, you will follow along with me there. Romans chapter 8, verse 15. I've got it here on the screen behind me, but I encourage you to follow along your Bibles if you will. There should be one in a pew around you. If you don't have one with you this morning. Romans 8, verse 15. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. This may have not been what you had thought when I mentioned we were going to talk about fear. Maybe you had more along the lines of some of what those pictures showed when something scary happens and you run away. But the root of all fear can be backed up into our mortality. Generally, all fear is based on the fact that we are fragile beings. Maybe it's a fear of getting hurt. Maybe it's some fear of emotional hurt. Whatever it might be, that's generally the root of all of our fears. This morning I want us to focus in on three things. First, that fear is natural. It's something that happens to you. If you're scared, if you're afraid, that's not something you should be ashamed of. It's something that happens naturally. And we're going to look at why. Second, we're going to look at how fear enslaves us. How fear enslaves us. And lastly, how God can free us. First, fear is something that's natural. That may not be something that you have been exposed to a lot in your life. Maybe fear has been something that people have said in your life was not natural, something you should overcome, you should never be afraid. And maybe you've grown to the point where you've denied your own fear and acted as though that it's not present and you have nothing yourself that you are afraid of. But I want to tell you this morning, that's not the case. Fear is something that's natural. Everybody is afraid. Everybody has that problem. It's not something that you have to go into alone. And as I said earlier, it's based on our mortality. James chapter 4 and verse 14 paints an interesting picture of what our lives are like here on this earth. He doesn't paint the picture of us being here for a long time, for us being a very substantive part of the time frame, and if we were to look at the whole timeline, just a little speck on it. James chapter 4 and verse 14. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Now you say, well, maybe that's kind of a depressing look on life. We're just a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. You've probably gotten up early in the morning sometime, maybe on your way to work or some other event, and you've been driving and there's fog. And then maybe on your way home, there wasn't fog. That's how our life is described. As a little vapor, a mist that's there for a little while, but then it's gone. No real evidence that it was ever there. So, immaterial as compared to the greater aspect of time as a whole, we're just here for a little while. That's something to be afraid of. That was my biggest fear when I was little. I didn't do anything that was really dangerous. There were some kids out on the playground that would climb up to the top of the jungle gym and jump off. It wasn't me. There were some kids that wanted to see just how high they could swing on that swing before the legs started teeter-tottering. That wasn't me either. There were some people that said, I want to grow up and join the armed forces and go overseas and fight people and risk my life. That wasn't me either. I have great respect for the people that do that, but I feared for my life. I was really scared. I rode with training wheels for a very, very long time. I saw myself as extremely valuable to myself, and I recognized how easy it was to get hurt. My little brother, when I was very young, climbed on top of our desk, jumped off, and broke his arm. And I could hear him screaming for days. I was afraid. I still am. When we had to take a flight out to Washington State to help my sister move back, I was terrified the whole time. I thought Patty was going to bust out laughing because the whole time I'm gripping the seat every time we had turbulence. I just don't do well with it. Because we're fragile beings. We're not meant to be up that high. We're not meant to be in those dangerous situations, and our bodies aren't meant to handle and take it. And that can cause a lot of fear. Maybe that's not something that scares you. But when it comes down to it, when our life is put on the line, whatever level it takes for us to get to realize that, possibly change from person to person, but whenever you realize your life is in jeopardy, we become very afraid. And that's natural, because our life is fragile. But it goes a step further than that. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 20, the preacher notices something. We've mentioned Ecclesiastes several times recently. And it's a great book. I'm not going to take just a trip and read through Ecclesiastes one time. It's not really a long read, but there's a lot of wisdom and insight there, specifically on what life really is. Solomon had every resource of Israel at his disposal. He was possibly the most wealthy king of his time, definitely the wisest, and he had access to trade routes to different countries, wisdom, pleasure. And he tried to satisfy himself with knowledge, with physical pleasure. He tried to satisfy himself with accumulating great possessions, with joy, enjoying his life. He tried everything. Notice what he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, beginning in verse 20, about life. These are the wise man's observations. So I turned about and gave my heart to despair over all the toils of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even at night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? It makes an interesting point. He has accumulated great wealth. He has grown a great kingdom and enjoyed many things. But one day he's going to pass that on to someone else. Possibly one of his descendants, maybe someone else taking over everything. Whatever it might be, he's going to pass that on to someone, and who knows whether or not they're going to use it well. Who knows whether they're going to be wise with the things he's accumulated. It's very common for us to want to build up a great amount of things for our children so they can have a better life than we had. That's a noble thought. But what if we set them up with all this great wealth or great power, or set them in this place where they can't accomplish good, and it ends up hurting them? What if they end up hurting others? What if we set them up with this power and They don't know how to use it right. We all are familiar with that famous quote, with great power comes great responsibility. What if they're not responsible when we set all this power on them and it falls to ruin? Well, these are some of the things going through Solomon's head. They said it's vain. There's no point to it. It's like catching the wind. You can't do it, and there's not much of a point. He said there's not much anything for you to do except to just enjoy what you have as a gift from God, because you don't know what's coming next. Life is just vain. If we try to find fulfillment, enjoyment, and ultimate peace only looking here, we're not going to find it. Fear is natural because our lives are short, and there's no ultimate fulfillment to be found in it. That gives us a reason to find fear. Because if you're thinking, well, after I find full enjoyment, then I'll be okay. I'll be ready to die whenever, and it won't bother me. Well, if you're just looking for it down here, you're not going to find it. You're never going to get to that point where you say, I'm content, I don't need any more. I'm content, I don't have anything else I want to do. There's always going to be something else you need or want. There's always going to be something else you need or want to do. Maybe it's to protect your family a little more. Maybe it's to accomplish this or accomplish that. Or to leave the people you love in a little better situation. Whatever it be. This fear is natural because we'll never see that accomplished under the sun. We'll never see that accomplished of itself by itself. Apart from the fact that fear is natural, that doesn't mean that it's good. Not all natural things are good. Many poisons grow naturally. That doesn't mean they're necessarily good for you. And fear comes naturally. But that doesn't necessarily make it good for you either. Fear traps us. The fragility of our lives. How easy it is to be lost and how short and meaningless it is without something better, bigger, without some cause greater than ourselves. It traps us. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27 deals specifically with how we're trapped by death. Specifically with how the fact that our lives are so short and can be so menial that death in itself traps us and holds us captive. We can't escape it. It's laid there for each and every one of us. We're all just this short paper that's only going to last for a little while. Now, please bear with me. This isn't going to be the most depressing lesson you've ever heard in your life. There is an upside. But I want us to fully understand what's going on here. Fear is something that will completely and totally enslave us, with no positive thing to look forward to here just in this world. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 2 says, let's see, 9 verse 27, that sounds a little bit better. And just as appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. There's nothing you can do to escape death. For everyone it's appointed to die once, and then comes the judgment. The only ones that won't have to taste that death is those that are present when the Lord returns. But unless you're in that golden time, you're going to die. All of our lives are set as being just this finite point of time. One day it's going to end. But then comes the interesting part. There's going to be a judgment. Man is appointed to die once, and then comes something. It's not over. After that point, we're going to be judged by something, based upon something. And the Bible of both Paul and the letter to the church of Corinth tells us we're going to be judged for the things we say. We're going to be judged based on law. We're going to be judged by Jesus. Even alludes to how we're going to technically be judged by each other in so much how we act and how we work and what we do. We'll be judged for every hour of work we speak. The Bible is full of showing us how we're going to be judged. But suffice it to say, the Hebrew writer here points out very basically and very simply, you die and then you go to judgment. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 20, a passage once again we looked at recently, lets us know very pointedly that there is no one that is innocent. You can't find a person on the earth whose righteousness hasn't sinned. You can't find it. We can also look at Romans chapter 3, which points out that everyone's sinned. Verse 23 says we've all fallen short of the glory of God. Verse 10 in that same chapter says there's not one of us righteous, no, not one. We're all going to have to go to judgment. We're all guilty. If you've reached that point in your life where you have been met with a decision to either choose self or choose God, you've chosen self. You've chosen the world. You've chosen pleasure. If you've been to that point, you failed. I hate to be the bearer of bad news if you haven't realized that yet. Man's broken, and we're trapped. We're trapped by death. We have to die, then comes judgment. As I said, this can look pretty depressing. Because at this point, we're facing the biggest fear of all. Not only is this short life going to end, but it's going to end, and then we're going to be held accountable for how we acted on this short life. And we can already know that going into the matter, when we have this big scroll laid out in front of us of all the bad things we've done, just even one of them shows we're guilty. It's over. We've messed up. But there is a ray of good light. Jesus, God, they knew that. All the way back in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve for the first time decided, we choose not God. They knew this would happen. And they provided a way for us to be fixed, for us to be whole, for us to no longer have death being held over us, to no longer have judgment to look forward to as a way of punishment. Provided a way for us to look forward to death. That's how we conquer. That's how God frees us. And that death is no longer something we fear, but something we look forward to. Gives us the ability to live fearlessly. Not because I'm no longer scared. Yes, I'm still scared of dying. I don't like pain. I don't look forward to it. But death and the judgment that comes after it is no longer something I have to fear. It's no longer something that I have to look at and say, I really don't want that yet. I haven't got my life right. It's something I can look forward to. Notice in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9. See, that's kind of cut off a little bit. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9. How has God freed us? How did God take away the fear we have in death? He died for us. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9 says, you have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God your God has anointed you with oil of gladness beyond your companions. This is being said about Jesus. Through Jesus being exalted, through Jesus undergoing the different things that he underwent, we have an opportunity. You see, through his death, he tasted death for all of us. It brings us, that's what it says in chapter 2 and verse 9. Through that same exaltation that he had, through that same bringing up, through him being exalted by his death, we have an opportunity to overcome as well. Don't let yourself be held back by fear. Don't let yourself be held back by the fear you have in death. Verse 9 of chapter 2 says, but we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus. He was crowned with glory and honor, like we read before back in chapter 1. He was crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Why should you be scared of death? Because Jesus tasted it for you. He underwent it for you. Everyone that would have to go up to that judgment seat based on the things that they have done, they would fail. If they had reached that age where they had the opportunity to decide, they'd fail. But Jesus went for you. He died for you. He lived a perfect, simple life for you. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 6, we see once again how this allowance is made. This opportunity is given for us to have freedom through Jesus. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 6. So we can confidently say, The Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Having no more reason to fear death, being freed by what Jesus has done for you, what do you have left to fear? Well, someone might hurt me, and then I'll die. Then I'll have to go to judgment. Where God, through the grace offered in Jesus, will let me pass on into an eternity of happiness. I'll no longer have to suffer on earth. I'll no longer have to be worried about providing or helping my family. I'll no longer have to have all those burdens. I can trust that God now has everything in His hands. The most nervous time for me whenever going through the testing process is the time before I take the test. Because that's the time I'm supposed to be preparing. When the testing time comes on, there's no more reason for me to be nervous. It's sitting right in front of me. There's nothing else I can do. I might as well take it. When I know, I know. When I don't know, I don't know. Afterwards, there's no reason for me to be nervous. Many people are really worried about what they got on their grade. I can't change it now. No point being nervous now. That's similar to life. Here right now, sure, there's reason to be nervous if this is all you're looking forward to. But after when there's nothing we can go back to do to change it, when we've already entered the reward, there's only happiness. I have a question for each of us to think about this morning. Have you been free from fear? Are you ready? Are you ready to be free from fear? Are you ready to stop being afraid? Are you ready to say that you won't be enslaved by this fear any longer? Doesn't mean that nothing in this world will ever frighten you again. That's not what we're talking about. Or are you ready to go on in this life, never having to worry again about what comes after death? Jesus offers a solution. And the solution is simple. He died for you, now you die for Him. You don't have to earn anything anymore because you can anyway, but He did it for you. He lived the perfect life that you should have lived, that you couldn't live. And He died the death that many of us would be unwilling to do. He went through the suffering, the pain, and He rose again. Now He says, die for me. He's not requiring a physical death, but a spiritual one where you're buried in water and you rise again, just as He rose again, to have a new life. One that's guaranteed a place in heaven, as long as that relationship remains, not based on the good things that you've done, but on what Jesus had done for you, and you maintaining that relationship with Him. As 1 John chapter 1 says, as long as you're walking in the light, as He is in the light, then God's just to cleanse you of your sins. He's not cutting a loophole. It's not a back door and He's having to sneak you in. He's just to do it, to forgive you. If you'd like to have that opportunity to be forgiven, if you'd like to be able to go through life no longer being afraid, all you have to do is come to Jesus. All you have to do is die and live for Him. If you'd like to make that decision this morning, won't you come right now together? We stand and sing.